Boudica, an icon of British resilience and Celtic culture, the most famous and iconic of the Celtic Britons, a feminist icon and a British folk hero. No one can deny that she's a great Briton. In fact, she's considered to be one of the greatest women in all of history, and is ranked the 35th greatest person in all of British history, and the 7th greatest woman in British history, according to BBC polls in 2002. This video will piece together evidence to best explore a complete life story of Boudica and her legacy in depth. However, this is easier said than done. This is because almost everything we know about Boudica is written from Roman sources, as the Celts failed to write any written records. There are two Romans who we can learn Boudica's story from, and these are the only two primary sources of Boudica. These are Cassius Dio and Publius Cornelius Tacitus. Cassius is Greek, and his accounts are known to be exaggerated. He also has a reputation for being biased towards Roman viewpoints, and was anti-Celtic at times. However, the biggest problem with Cassius is that his sources are written almost 200 years after Boudica's death. Tacitus has a reputation of being slightly more reliable. He's Roman, and he lived much closer to the time. The biggest pro for Tacitus is that his father was Agricola, who was the former governor of Britannia during Boudica's rebellion. He's also known for being slightly more sympathetic towards the Celts. However, both Cassius and Tacitus had certain things in common. They both had anti-establishment streaks, and were sympathetic for what Boudica went through. However, did both need to justify Rome's actions. We will be using both of their sources, but please note that everything from ancient history must be taken with a mountain of salt. Other sources such as anthropology, archaeology, and educated assumptions from respected historians will also be taken account to forge the full story of Boudica's life. Not much is known about Boudica's early life, so to best paint a picture, we'll be exploring the life of early Britons, her tribe, and the political circumstances that surrounded her husband, before getting into Boudica herself, when she actually started entering the history books. Boudica was a Briton in an occupied land known as Britannia. So what do we know about the life of the Roman Britons? Well, the occupation of Britannia by the Romans saw Britons becoming second-class citizens in their own homeland. Celtic gods became Romanised, and many of them were enslaved. Britons were seen as savages, and were subject to high taxation and forced conscription. They were sold into slavery, such as manual labour, and into the gladiator pits. Slave owners were free to punish their slaves as they wished. Female slaves normally served women, applying makeup and looking after children, although they also faced some sexual abuse. However, some slave owners treated their slaves quite well. However, the Britons always proved to be a pain in the backside for the Romans. They had constant unrest, with the Druids seen with discontent by the Romans. The Celtic Britons also didn't get on with each other. They were never unified before Rome, and were constantly warring against one another. However, the majority of Britons, who lived in more rural and less Romanised areas, saw minimal change in their life. Boudica, however, would have been subjected to more Romanisation, as she lived in a more urban area, although this wouldn't be considered urban by today's standards. Boudica was an Iceni, meaning that she hailed from the Iceni Tribe in what is now called Norfolk. They were a wealthy tribe, most probably from their salt trade, and used to trade with the continent, such as the Gaul, or what we now call the French. There are two ways to say Iceni: the English way with a soft C, Iceni, or the Latin way with a hard C, Iceni. However, nobody knows how the Iceni themselves pronounced their own name. The Romans would have called them the Iceni, however I'm going to be using Iceni just because it's what I'm used to. There is a similar divide between the words Celtic and Celtic. The Iceni were known to be skilled horse riders and skilled metal workers. They were one of the few Briton tribes to start minting their own coins, and were the most skilled in the world for metalwork during their time, even more so than Rome and China. This proves that the Iceni tribe had a huge amount of culture and intelligence. They wore basic animal clothings and fabrics, and during Boudica's time, the Briton elites would have started to have worn Roman togas. They had rebelled against Roman rule in the past, predominantly when the Romans came to disarm them, and were quickly put down. Unrest in 47 AD led to the Romans making it illegal for British subjects to own weapons, and this was common procedure across the empire. The main Roman army was away from Iceni land, still fighting against British resilience led by the Druids. So the confiscation of Iceni weapons could have been a way to secure the land while they was away fighting. Taking the weapons away from the Iceni would have been a huge deal to this warrior culture. The weapons, which would have been treasured by families and treated as heirlooms, would now be melted down. It's during this Roman rule that Boudica lived, and her husband, King Pragutagus, negotiated a peace treaty with the Romans to secure their own protection. Little is known about Pragutagus, but this coin was minted under his reign. It has Latin writing on, which is unique for Briton coins, and shows how Romanised Pragutagus was. Historians also state that his reign was long and prosperous. Conversely, some speculate that Pragutagus may have in fact been a puppet king. When the Romans came to disarm the Iceni, Pragutagus could have been placed to replace the true Iceni king, who has since been written out of history. We'll now be exploring this treaty, as it's incredibly important to understand Boudica's rebellion. As we've already been over, Pragutagus may have in fact been a puppet as outlined in this treaty, although there's no evidence to support this. The terms also stated that when Pragutagus died, Iceni land would be under Roman rule, but the lands would be split between his two daughters and the Emperor of Rome. The Iceni were also given 40 million sesterces, probably to help Romanise them. However, this was a loan and expected to be paid back, plus interest. Therefore, this could have also been a way to put the Iceni in debt to Rome. Estimates suggest that this is worth around £48 million in today's money. It should also be noted that the Iceni never asked or needed this loan, as they were already a wealthy tribe. However, they accepted it anyway, probably to make trading with the Romans easier. Some suggests that the Iceni had no concept of what a loan was, so this part of the peace treaty could have also been a trick. Nero became emperor in 54 AD when he was just 16 years old. Nero was known for his ability to spend money on extravagance, and to make up for his debts, Nero rose taxes and chased loans. It's under Nero that Paulinus was given a new job of governing Britannia, and of chasing up that 40 million sesterce loan, sort of like a debt collector. We now know the circumstances that would have governed Boudica's early life. But who actually was she, other than just the wife of Pragutagus? Well, she was one of the elite of the Iceni tribe, and would have most probably adopted many aspects of Roman culture. In her early life, she may have actually been in favour of Rome. Her people, on the other hand, would have still been living in the Iron Age. Her name was Latinised as Boadicea, which means victorious in Celtic. Therefore, this name may have just been a placeholder for her real name, which was not known. Some speculate that Boudica may not have even existed, and instead has drifted into legend, sort of like Robin Hood. Boadicea could have also just been another name for Britannia, which was just the name that the Romans gave to the whole island of Britannia, meaning that Boudica could have just been used by Roman historians to symbolise the British Islands. Tacitus, between the years of 56 and 117 AD, referred to her as Boudica, spelt in two different ways, in Latin. Cassius, on the other hand, between the years of 150 and 235 AD, referred to her as Boudica or Boadicea in Greek. However, Polydore Virgil, who's an important historian, who revitalised Boudica's story around the Renaissance, referred to her as Boadicea and Boadicea, and these were quite popular between 1470 and 1555 AD, before it turned out to be a translation error. These are only the most popular of Boudica's names. Other examples are Bonduca, Bonduica, Bunduca, Boadicea, Boudica, Budug, Boudica, Bunducea, Boudica, Boadicea, Voda, and Vodicea. However, Boudica is the most likely spelling, as Tacitus used it the most. Boadicea was also commonplace in the medieval age, due to misspellings from Tacitus's work. Her name has also been translated into Irish as Bodish, meaning having virtues, and into Welsh as Budug, which is a more likely spelling, as Boudica would have spoken a language very similar to Welsh, and this also means victorious in Welsh. However, the most likely spelling, even in the Celtic language, is still Boudica, pronounced Boudica. The name can also be translated as Victoria or Victorina. Boudica was born in Roman Britannia, most probably in Iceni territory around 30 AD. She could have lived in the town of Thetford, as she used it as her main military base during her militant years. She was a native British woman, but was probably pro-Roman in the beginning, as the Iceni were once allies of Rome. She was the wife of King Prasutagus, and had 2 daughters with him, who we don't know the names of. They were aged 10 and 12 during the rebellion. She would have been of Romano-British culture, where, although not equal, women could occupy positions of power, and was one of the most gender-equal cultures of the time. It should still be noted, however, that most women were still housemaids, and only the minority gained power. Boudica was one of these privileged, being a queen. There's significant evidence that females were still respected rulers in ancient Britain. For instance, they'd been found buried with material goods and in chariots. Cartamandria, the queen of the Brigidades for example, was another female ruler at the time of Boudica. This was significantly different to Roman culture. She most likely spoke a P-Celtic language like Brythonic, which is most similar today to Welsh, and may have even spoke Latin due to Romanisation. However, there's no proof either way. There is also some evidence to suggest that the Iceni spoke a Germanic language due to genetic sampling, which would in turn suggest that the Iceni migrated from further afield. However, this is only speculative and is highly debated at this time. She was not Christianised and held on to her Celtic beliefs. She may have also acted as some sort of religious leader or even a druid. Cassius Dio stated that she, possessed of higher intelligence than often belonged to women. This is why it's suggested that she could have been a druid, as druids studied many things and were seen as intellectuals to the Britons. If she was indeed a druid, this would have made her even more respected than just being a queen. However, most druids were male, but it is a possibility. She was 31 years old when the rebellion took place, which was a good age for the time, and she was also from a noble family. This coin is the only image we have of Boudica, which was minted around the time of Boudica's revolt, although it's not certain that it is Boudica or even a woman. Some point out, for example, that the mouth looks like a moustache, which was a common thing that Celtic men grew. Cassius Dio wrote, "A terrible disaster occurred in Britain. 80,000 of the Romans and of their allies perished, and the island was lost to Rome. Moreover, all this ruin was brought upon the Romans by a woman, a fact which itself caused them the greatest shame. But the person who was chiefly instrumental in rousing the natives and persuading them to fight the Romans, the person who was thought worthy to be their leader and who directed the conduct of the entire war, was Boudica, a Briton woman of the royal family and possessed of greater intelligence than often belongs to women. In stature she was very tall, in appearance most terrifying, in a glance of her eye most fierce, and her voice was harsh. A great mass of the tawniest hair fell to her hips. Around her neck was a golden necklace, and she wore a tunic of diverse colours, over which a thick mantle was fashioned with a brooch. This was her invariable attire." He also later added that she held a spear when talking to her people, and that she would also take her jewellery off and work in the field with her people at times. The necklace Cassio was referring to was probably a torque, which acted as a kind of crown for the Celtic people. And tawniest hair, in today we'd call either ginger or light brown. A woman was found in a grave that many believe could be Boudica, however we're not sure. This is known as the Watling skeleton. She's in her late 30s to early 40s, whereas most women died around 25, so this does align with Boudica. She's also very tall. Something interesting here is that she had a disfigured face, so this may be why Boudica was described as having a terrifying appearance. Or it could have just been poetic license. She was also buried with an iron mirror, a brooch and beads. Oh, and a pig, which is probably food for the afterlife. This suggests that she was a queen, or at least of noble family. And what points to Boudica the most is that she was buried in a large grand chariot, and must have been very distinguished. However, it is buried all the way up in East Yorkshire, and it's also likely that she was from the Iceni Tribe, as she followed the Iceni Tribe's burial rituals. But it is an interesting theory and a small possibility. When Prasutagus died, he honoured the treaty, and left half of his land to the Roman Empire and half of his land to his 2 daughters. Boudica was most likely meant to act as regent until her 2 daughters came of age. Paulinus, however, decided to ignore the peace treaty and refused to recognise a woman as leader, further showing the disconnect between Celtic and Roman culture. Paulinus instead insisted that all of the land was now owned by Rome. Furthermore, Paulinus demanded that the loan was to be repaid at once, plus interest. He may have taken the land as an act of repaying the loan, or just as callospacy. The arrival of Roman troops would have been distressing for Boudica, added to the fact that she and her daughters were still in mourning. When the loan failed to be repaid, the Romans went into every home and took all the value they could find. Tacitus wrote that the Romans seized Iceni property and plundered them like prizes of war. Men were taken as slaves and young women were raped. Other members of Boudica's family may have also been enslaved. Boudica protested this land grab and in return got a flogging while her daughters were raped. When Boudica attempted to stop the Romans assaulting her daughters, she was beaten and stripped naked in front of her people. It was illegal under Roman law to rape and to flog. Rape was punishable by death, and Boudica was considered a citizen of Rome. These acts by the Romans were seen in a negative light even by the historians of the time. It should however be noted that these were brutal times and hard people. Boudica later called for a meeting with other tribal leaders and found that they were also discontented with Rome. The physical attack on Boudica and her daughters along with the pillaging was also a psychological attack on Iceni culture as a whole. This psychological attack however failed to force the Britons to submit and instead just pissed them off. Boudica gained much sympathy from the Celtic leaders, who all agreed to put their differences aside for now and unite against Rome. It's likely that the Romans, showing dominance and supremacy of Roman culture over Celtic culture, managed to unite the Celts against them. This also shows how lowly the Britons were seen in the eyes of the Romans and the hatred that had brewed between the 2 groups. Boudica used a spear and rode atop a chariot. Word spread quickly, and village after village joined her. She now had an army of around 120,000. It's likely that Boudica painted herself in blue Celtic woad, a form of magical battle paint. Tacitus noted that the Iceni didn't even bother to plant crops, instead spending the whole season smithing weapons of war as they were melted down previously by the Romans. War fever was certainly high. According to Cassius Dio, Boudica also called upon the help of Andastre. Cassius Dio stated that Boudica said the following, although it's likely that all of the supposed speeches of the time are dramatised. This was common for Roman historians to do. You have found out how much freedom differs from slavery through real experiences, so that, even if earlier some of you, through ignorance of what was superior, were tricked by the tempting promises of the Romans, you now, having tried both, how great a mistake you have made in preferring an imported tyranny to your ancient way of life, and you know how much penury without a master surpasses the wealth of a slave. Let us, therefore, go against the Romans, thrusting boldly to good fortune. Let us show them that they are hares and foxes, trying to rule over dogs and wolves. And then when Boudica had finished speaking, she performed an act of dinovation. She reportedly let a hare escape from the fold of her dress, and then when the hare ran away, the crowd shouted with pleasure. And then Boudica raised her hand towards heaven and said, "I thank you, Andastre, and call upon you as a woman speaking to a woman. I beg you for victory and preservation of liberty." Boudica and the Iceni tribe were joined by the Trinovates tribe to the south. The Trinovates were the neighbours and once rivals of the Iceni, who had lost much of their land to the Romans. Boudica is pretty unique in the fact that she was a female leader. She must have been pretty charismatic in order to persuade other warriors to flock behind her. However, Boudica may not have been the sole leader. She certainly wouldn't have been leading the Trinovates tribe. Boudica may have just been one of many other leaders. However, she was certainly considered to be the queen of the Celts by the Romans. She and her followers headed towards Caledonium, modern-day Colchester. Caledonium was the main Roman town and the capital of South Britannia. Added to this, its garrison, the 20th Legion, was away. It also had no defensive walls. Many discharged and retired Roman warriors lived here, and there was also a statue of victory here, which was viewed negatively by the Celts. On top of all this, it was also the old capital of the Trinovates tribe before the Roman conquest, so the march on Caledonium may have been a Trinovates idea more than the Iceni. As demonstrated, there are many reasons why Caledonium may have been the target. Paulinus and the 20th Legion, who were in charge of defending Britannia, were away in Wales at the time, battling against the Druids in Anglesey, known then as Mona. Here the Romans took part in the unwitting sacrifice of Druids, and the Romans were very suspicious people. I'll do a video on the Druids and the Roman conquest of Anglesey later on. But after the Romans were tricked into the sacrificing of Druids, there were reports of the English Channel turning blood red, people saw visions of a ruined city, corpses started washing up on shores around Britannia, and there was a vision of the Roman goddess of victory statue in Caledonium getting destroyed. The Romans, being superstitious, would have certainly been terrified by these rumours. Caledonium sent word to Londinium for aid after hearing of the Iceni tribe, but its leader, Decianus, only sent 200 slaves to help. They probably underestimated Boudica's army's size. Boudica ambushed a further 2,000 men segment of the 9th Legion as they were also rushing to help Caledonium. Boudica was brutal in her revenge. Men, women and children were butchered through hanging, crucifixion, burning and torture without any sympathy. They burnt down everything, including houses, temples and monuments. The few surviving villagers sought safety in the temple of Claudius. In there they were protected for at least 2 days by the few remaining Roman soldiers. The Romans had superior tactics and equipment, and made a heroic last stand within the temple. However, Boudica's numbers were too great and she slaughtered everybody inside. Cassius Dio wrote that they hung up naked the noblest and distinguished women, and then cut off their breasts and sewed them in their mouths, in order to make their victims appear to be eating them. Afterwards they impaled the women on sharp skewers run lengthways through their entire body. All this they did to the accompaniment of sacrifices, banquets and wanton behaviour, not only in all their other sacred places, but particularly in the grove of Andate, also known as Andastre. This was their name for victory, and they regarded her with the most exceptional reverence. Caledonium was so fully sacked that archaeologists can still make out a 25 to 40 centimetre thick scorched debris, known as the Boudican Destruction Horizon. These can be best seen today in Queen Street and the Williams and Griffin site. These destruction layers represent a British mini version of Pompeii. The Britons also cut off the head of the statue of Emperor Nero and paraded it as a souvenir before throwing it into a nearby river. It can now be seen in the British Museum. There are no graves as proof of this butcher, so some theorise it could have just been Roman propaganda. However, it's also likely that the bodies were just not buried and simply eaten by animals and taken by nature. They may have also been taken somewhere else for sacrifice, and yes, sacrifices were known to happen during this time. Upon hearing of the sacking of Caledonium, Paulinus force-marched his forces back into Roman Britannia. Meanwhile, Londinium, now called London, was Boudica's next target. It was a bustling trade city within Roman Britannia, and possibly Rome's most important and largest settlement within Britannia. If Boudica managed to destroy Londinium, it would have been a major blow to the Romans. However, before Boudica's horde made it, Paulinus arrived early with a small mounted army. However, upon seeing the size of Boudica's army, he abandoned Londinium to reunite with his full army. Boudica butchered any Roman she came across on her travels, ethnically cleansing Britannia. When she got there, Londinium's citizens were slaughtered, and many of the buildings now became rubble. Boudica showed no mercy, and the same fate met Londinium that befell Caledonium. Tacitus states that over 70,000 citizens were butchered. Many slaves were now freed and joined Boudica's now 230,000 strong army. The Celts were now looting and feasting, their rage fading, and it took them a long time to travel. Boudica was not a strategist and seemingly had no plan. However, many of the Celts flocked to her, and her force grew to around 250,000, according to the Romans. If she had taken this time to attack the Roman forces, she could have won the war and could have ended Roman occupation. However, she opted to instead burn and pillage the surrounding areas. Eventually Verulamium became Boudica's next target. Verulamium was a small town north of London. Watling Street, a famous road that linked Dover and London to Wroxeter in the West Midlands, was one of the major highways up until the end of medieval England, and this road ran through Verulamium. However, the lack of material wealth that Boudica gained here could suggest that the people of Verulamium managed to escape and taking most of their goods with them. Nevertheless, the settlement was sacked and rubbled. Boudica took her time travelling this short distance, adding further to the evidence that she had no plan. It took Boudica's forces so long to get here that the citizens were able to take everything with them. Paulinus, on the other hand, used this time wisely. He sent out messages calling for all of the retired Roman warriors who could hold a sword to regroup with him and his main army. His force had now grown up to around 10,000. He also sent for help from the 5,000 strong army in Devon. However, the leader, Pianus Postumus, refused to come. This could have been because of the Roman superstitious nature, believing that Paulinus had been cursed by the Druids, or it could have just been cowardice. This same leader also failed to send men to Londinium upon it getting attacked. However, this could have been because there was a smaller revolt in Somerset, in which he put down. Paulinus' army was now surrounded by fleeing refugees, most of them Romans. Paulinus told the civilians following him to carry on into Wales, while he would turn and make a last stand. Paulinus had by this time reunited his army and picked a spot to do battle. The spot is not exactly known, however it was somewhere along Watling Street. The Battle of Watling Street is one of the most important battles in British history, and one of, if not the largest army the Roman Empire would ever face. Some suggest that Boudica could have been heading back home when they encountered the Roman army, while most suggest that she was meeting them head on. This would also be one of the largest battles to ever happen on the British Isles. If Boudica won, Britannia could have broken free from occupation, possibly, and if she lost, Britannia would be cemented a dominion of the Roman Empire. Stakes were high. The Romans had picked a defensive position where they couldn't be flanked. The Britons had much greater numbers and were confident of victory, having 100,000 men compared to the 10,000 Romans. Many civilians accompanied the Britons into battle, including women, children and elderly. They rode in wagons and littered the outskirts of the battle watching. The two motivational speeches are also known from this battle. Boudica reportedly said the following: "It is not as a woman descendant from noble ancestry, but as one of the people avenging lost freedom. My scourged body, the outraged chastity of my daughters. Roman lust has gone so far that not our very persons, nor even age or virginity are left unpolluted. But heaven is on the side of the righteous and venturous. A legion which dared to fight has perished. The rest are hiding themselves in their camp or thinking anxiously of flight. They will not sustain even the din or shout of many thousands, much less the charge of our blows. If you weigh well the strength of the armies and the causes of war, you will see that in this battle you must conquer or die. This is a woman's resolve. As for men, they can live or be slaves." The Roman commander Paulinus reportedly said the following: "Ignore the racket made by these savages. There are more women than men in their ranks. They're not soldiers, they're not even properly equipped. We've beaten them before, and when they see our weapons and feel our spirit, they'll crack. Stick together. Throw the javelins and push forward, knock them down with your shields and finish them off with your swords. Forget about plunder. Just win and you'll have everything." After the Briton war dances and the motivational speeches, Boudica rode out with her chariots first and pummeled the Romans with javelins. They dealt much damage but had very little experience in fighting heavy armoured Romans. The Britons rushed the Romans with overwhelming numbers. However, the Romans pushed forward in a wedge formation, cutting through the centre of the Britons. Boudica ordered her chariots to trail behind and support the rear, and attempted to stop her warriors falling back. This worked in regard of stopping the Britons falling back, however the Romans would keep pushing forward, cutting through hundreds. The Britons attempted to fall back, however they were blocked by onlookers and were easily flanked. The Romans showed no mercy in slaughtering the Britons. Boudica, however, managed to slip away. Everything was slain by the Romans. the women, children, and even the Briton animals. This was a devastating defeat for the Britons, and would cement them under Roman rule for centuries. Around 80,000 Britons died, compared to a mere 400 Romans. Boudica managed to escape the battle on a chariot, but it's unknown what fate befell her. Tacitus wrote that she committed suicide by poison. However, Cassius Dio stated that she died of an illness. Nobody knows what happened to her daughters. Emperor Nero considered withdrawing from Britannia, but the idea died with him, although future Romans were much less willing to settle in Britannia. Nero claimed that it was not Rome that caused this butchery, but Paulus, which convinced the Britons to conform to Roman rule. He stated that it's not Rome's fault when things go wrong, but the current governors. There are rumours that Boudica is buried between platforms 9 and 10 in King's Cross Station in London. However, there's no architectural evidence to support this, so it's likely that this is just a misrepresentation of a book by Lewis Spence, who theorised that the Battle of Watling Street took place here. She could have been buried in a Roman style, or cremated in an Iron Age style. If she was buried, the most probable grave that's been found is the Watling grave, that we've already been over. Although carbon dating suggests that the skeleton is 100 years out of date, carbon dating has also been proven to not be 100% accurate. So what happened to Boudica's tribe, the Iceni? Well, after the Battle of Watling Street, Paulinus made his way back into Iceni territory and fully subjugated them. The Romans made an effort to build fortresses and marketplaces within Iceni territory. There's also accounts of them forcibly moving surviving Iceni peoples into these market towns. These acts did two things. They ensured that the Iceni could never rebel again, and also the destruction of their culture. There is also some evidence of mass graves during the time, so it's possible that a genocide of the Iceni population also took place. When the Iceni were preparing for war, they didn't plant any crops, and as they lost the rebellion, it caused a famine. It's unknown how many people starved to death, but some speculate that the mass graves were these same people. Paulinus' sequential subjugation of the Iceni people was so heavy-handed that he was recalled to Rome and replaced. Now Roman culture was dominant in the south of Britannia. However, they still never became as Romanised as their continental cousins, especially those in the north. This may have been because a lot of the Celts were now resentful towards Rome. South Britannia also remained a dominion of Rome until the empire fell due to external circumstances. But Boudica's rebellion was the closest the Britons ever came to ending Roman rule. The Romans would afterwards depict Boudica and the Battle of Watling Street in gladiator shows. This was an act of patriotism to show the supremacy of Rome over the British. The Romans called the Celtic gladiators Equestrius. They fought on a chariot and had a sword and spear. They were also really popular with the public at the time for the spectacle, and the style of these warriors were most likely influenced by Boudica. Boudica may have also been an invention of Rome to symbolise Britannia, as a form of a personification but for Celtic culture, and Britannia and Boudica may be overlapping or in fact be the same fictional figure. This is because history was written more like a story in the ancient times. Every nation got their own national personification. Boudica's story has been warped and recreated since the English Renaissance by poets, storytellers, filmmakers, artists and painters, and this is an ongoing process. Polydore Virgil, an Italian Anglophile, most probably reintroduced her into English history as Boadicea in 1534, much like a Robin Hood figure. Boudica, although it has a basis in reality, could also be considered a myth and legend. She took off during the English Renaissance because of Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth used Boudica as a propaganda tool. Not only were they both female rulers, but they was also required to defend England from Catholics. Anti-Catholic sentiment was high during this time, so Boudica raging against a Catholic Rome, who was also probably a Druid, shares similarities between Elizabeth fighting against a Catholic Spain and being head of the Church of England. A play was created in 1613 called Boudica by the King's Men, an acting company, and this was a dramatisation of Boudica's story and was really popular during its time. Furthermore, a song called Britons Strike Home was written in 1695 by Henry Purcell, which was created later for an adaptation of the Boudica play. This patriotic song is still well loved today. Caractacus is singing the song mainly in an attempt to rouse Boudica to arms. By the Victorian era, she was a popular figure of British nationalism and was at the height of her fame. Here, she became a symbol of British imperialism and empire because of a poem by William Cowper in 1784. This extract is a clear example. Other Romans shall arise, heedless of a soldier's name, sounds, not arms, shall win the prize. Harmony, the path to fame. Then the progeny that springs from the forests of our land, armed with thunder, clad with wings, shall a wider world command. The way the Victorians viewed Boudica is the same way we view Britannia today, exemplified by this iconic statue. Queen Victoria herself commissioned this bronze monument of Boudica in London, ironically the place she burnt to the ground. It was built for the Great Exhibition of 1851. It's also considered to be Thomas Thornycroft's finest work and is an iconic monument in London. Boudica's name, meaning victorious, would have also helped to gain popularity with the current Queen Victoria, who was seen as a Boudican-like figure and shared her namesake. There's another statue of Boudica in the Cardiff City Hall as one of the great Welsh hero statues. It was unveiled in 1916 and was displayed alongside St David, Hywel Dda, Gerald of Wales, Lynwen N, Elw Alof, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Defnyd ap Gwynedd, Owain Glynwyr, Henry VII, William Morrigan, William Williams Pantycline, and finally Sir Thomas Picton. She's displayed here as Budug, which is the Welsh translation for Boudica. She's the only female, the most ancient, and also the only person from outside of the modern Welsh nation. Sadly, due to revisionist cancel culture, Sir Thomas Picton was cancelled due to his links with slavery, and there was also concerns of Boudica's statue being removed because she perpetrated much worse crimes. However, she seems to have got a free pass. This is most likely because of one of two reasons. These people are known for being historically illiterate, or it could be because she's a woman, so she gets a free pass for diversity. HMS Boadicea is also a common name for ships in the Royal Navy. The first of these was the HMS Boadicea 1797, and she was a 38-gun fifth-rate ship, and she was used in the Napoleonic Wars. She's a very iconic and much-loved ship. The next was the HMS Boadicea 1875, which was a Branchet-class corvette and saw action in the Zulu War and the Boer War. Then we have the HMS Boadicea 1908, which was a Boadicea-class cruiser and was the lead ship in her squadron. She saw little action in World War I before becoming a minesweeper, and then she was put on harbour service. Then we have the HMS Boadicea II, which was a parent ship for armed petrol trawlers around Kingstown and Holyhead. And then we have the HMS Boadicea 1929, which was a B-class destroyer and served in World War II. She excavated civilians from Spain during their civil war, saw action in the Battle of the Atlantic, Operation Touch, the Russian convoys and the Normandy landings, but she sadly sunk right at the end of the war by a German aircraft. A more recent depiction of Boudica is Boudica, who is a minor superhero in DC's Green Lantern comics. Many view Boudica in a positive light, while some in a negative. In 2021, Boudica was charged with the Terrorism Act of 2000 in a mock trial at the Supreme Court, who presumably had nothing better to do. The trial was organised by the Education Charity Classics for All to promote the teaching of ancient history. By a margin of 10-1 in a 50-strong jury, Boudica and her people were acquitted as acts of self-defence. The judge, Lord Justice Stevens, said Boudica was free to leave without any stain on her character and remain a national symbol and inspirational hero. Many attempt to paint the Celts as some sort of noble savage, in the same sort of romanticism as the Native Americans are in America. But in reality, the Celts were a savage people. But this is not a bad thing, as they had different views and a vastly different culture to us today. Conversely, the Romans could also be seen as savages by today's standards, and were as brutal as the Celts in many respects. This again is neither good or bad, but just a difference in culture. Boudica's greatest achievement is that she exposed the brutal tactics and the hypocrisy of Rome, and proved that they used equally brutal methods. This is why Boudica is also a fascination for people who have a great interest in Roman history. She's still romanticised today, But whereas Britannia has taken over her role as the aspect of British nationalism, Boudica has been placed on a mantle of ancient feminism and Celtic nationalism. The suffragettes, who is a terrorist organisation in Britain, also adopted Boudica and embraced her as a symbol. For example, they used this Boadicea banner on marches. However, the suffragist movement, which is a non-terrorist organisation, also took a liking to Boudica. For example, she is a character in a suffragist book called The Pageant of Great Women by Sir Lee Hamilton. People also get very defensive about Boudica, especially those who are patriotic towards British or Celtic culture. Feminists also get very defensive, as she's one of the few truly strong and independent females in history. They see attacks on Boudica as an act of misogyny instead of just being critical about her actions. But being a woman has definitely helped Boudica's legacy. For example, few have even heard of Caractacus, even though he achieved much more than Boudica did. And yet Boudica is a household name in Britain, even though she's achieved much less. Conversely, a lot of people also like to deprecate and do down British history, so Boudica does sometimes get an unfairly negative spin. Boudica's attempted ethnic cleansing of Britain was in defence of the colonisation happening at the time of Britannia by foreigners. She was attempting to maintain an ethnically homogenous Britain, which was also driven by injustice and revenge. Therefore, the globalists also dislike her, as they see borders of countries as a negative thing, and believe that we should all just be global citizens. Boudica is neither a heroine or a villain. She's simply a product of her culture and of history, whose story is often romanticised, and she'll almost certainly remain a symbol of Celtic and British patriotism forever. So how does Boudica rank? She achieved in raising a major rebellion against Rome, and managed to burn down 2 major towns in Britannia, but she did fail to beat Rome. She lost the Battle of Watling Street, even though she had much greater numbers due to her lack of tactics, and seemingly had no other plan than to sack cities. Even if she had won the Battle of Watling Street, there was another 5,000 Romans in Devon, and Rome would have almost certainly have sent more. And on top of that, she didn't plan for defeat and caused a famine in Iceni territory. Her greatest achievement was not one she was aiming for, in proving that Rome could be just as savage as the tribes that they were conquering. Therefore, she gets a 4 out of 10 on achievement. She was viewed as a great Celtic female in her time, and Rome was certainly impressed and taken aback by her rebellion. She was also able to be crowned the Queen of the Celtic Britons and unifying many Celtic tribes that were once rivals. However, she was used by Rome as an example of Roman supremacy, and Rome used her absolute failure at the Battle of Watling Street as a propaganda tool. Therefore, she gets a 6 out of 10 on greatness. She has a great amount of influence in modern times, as she's used as an example of Celtic and British resilience. Being a female has also helped this longevity. She's used today in British schools to get greater diversity into the curriculum, as she's a female, and she's now a household name in Britain. Therefore, she gets a 7 out of 10 on modern influence. However, Boudica did fail in her goals. She made little progress other than sacking 2 towns, so she cannot get any marks for innovation. She also doesn't get any marks for being a female here, as being a female Celtic leader was not unheard of for the time. Although she did some truly horrendous things, we should not view the people of the past with the same morals as today, and many of the things she did was just an accepted way in Celtic culture. Her legacy is one of a vengeance Briton widow who stood up for herself and her culture. Although, again, she was unsuccessful, her managing to unite many of the Celts around her may have been harder because of her gender. She's also the iconic warrior woman. Therefore, she gets an even 5 out of 10 on legacy. So overall, Boudica scores 22, which places her at the #1 spot of the greatest Britons. However, she's also the only entry so far, so hopefully she can remain in this position. If you'd like to know more about Celtic culture and Rome and Britannia, please watch my other video. I've also linked other recommended content in the description, and all of the references used in this video are also in the description. Thanks for watching.